Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our monthly mining sector coffee chat. My name is John Price, and I will be leading a very interesting discussion today with two fantastic panelists about the mining situation, the mining investment climate today in Mexico. Let me just begin by giving you a little bit of background on who we are. AMI has been around under its former title. It was Info America. So we've been around for almost 30 years now, and we've been studying intensely the mining sector for about 18 years. What we do is we work with above ground risks. So all of the risks that affect mining investment, from political risk to community opposition to security issues. All of these risks we have in fact named as 7 different risk areas, and we've published in a paper that some of you may be familiar with called Managing Mining Risk in Latin America. And in a few minutes, I'm going to ask my colleague Andres Farge to copy and paste into the chat a link that you can go to and download that white paper free of charge. Today's session will be taped, and we ask that you as attendees do not tape it yourselves. We reserve that right, but we will share with you the recording and a summary in about a week's time. We'll post it on our site, and we'll send out an email to all of those who registered for today's mining chat, coffee chat, and you'll get a recording of it as well. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our panel today. Jorge Sanchez is a partner at Haynes and Boone, and Jorge I've had the opportunity to work with in the past at PDAC and other events, speaking about mining risk in Mexico and other parts of Latin America. He is a leading voice and takes on some of the most complicated cases for miners in Mexico. I'm also joined by Fernando Varela, founder of FV Consulting, a veteran of security issues in both mining and energy sector in Mexico. Fernando is keenly aware of the very fragmented security issues in Mexico. So it's wonderful to have them both here. I really appreciate their time today. And the way we are going to operate today, as we do in the past, is we have prepared a series of questions which the panelists and myself will discuss for the first 45 minutes or so. And what we ask of you is that you post your questions in the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer them in the final 15 to 20 minutes of today. So let me begin by giving just a bit of a background on the Mexico mining investment climate, because given the high price of metals in many of the metals that are key to Mexico's mining sector, there's keen interest in Mexico. But there's also a keen understanding that there are certain operational risks in Mexico. And to really understand the risk environment in Mexico, you have to understand really at least three areas. One is the government, both at the national and local levels, and their degree of support for mining. The other is the mining unions and how they act as either supporters of mining or a thorn, frankly, in the side of a lot of miners. And then, of course, organized crime, which is highly fragmented in Mexico, and in some parts of Mexico, you can operate without concerns, and in others, it's a grave concern. And one has to sort of turn the clock back 21 years to the year 2000. The year 2000 was a watershed moment in Mexico because the longest political monopoly reign of any democracy in the world was the Mexico PRI. It lasted longer than any party in India or in Japan, which were the longest living democratic rules. But Mexico's PRI dominated the country for so long. And one of the things that provided was, first of all, a very cozy relationship with an umbrella organization under which almost every union in Mexico operated. It also meant that the government was able to, behind the scenes, exercise a degree of control, or probably a better term, collaboration with organized crime, and kept their activities somewhat in control. In 2000, when the PRI lost control of the government, and with it lost access to money, this union organization began to splinter. And today we have multiple unions serving the mining sectors, as we have multiple unions serving a lot of different industries. And some of those unions, without the patronage of political parties, have looked to other patrons to finance themselves. Now, we can only speculate who those are because it's not necessarily proven, and I don't want to get myself in any litigatable situation, but there's certainly great speculation that some unions are in bed with organized crime. And the mining sector, and there's a few projects out there in Mexico that have suffered as a result of this. But then again, the unions themselves are not necessarily unified top-down controlled organizations. They also have their local chapters and their local issues. Much the same can be said about security. Security apparatus of Mexico, which used to be very centralized, has become much more decentralized. And the efforts by the AMLO administration to put together a Guardia Nacional has not resulted in a very professional organization of great effectiveness. So what you have for miners who often operate far from any kind of strong arm control of any government, even a municipality government, you have them often fending themselves against opponents to their projects. And then, of course, there's the government of AMLO, which began its 6-year reign right out of the gate, saying some pretty strong things against the mining sector. But in the end, some of those parts of the party that wanted to pass laws to tax the mining industry, to limit the mining industry, were reined in. I think probably because AMLO realized that mining is one of those sectors that can't go anywhere, and that in this time of high metal prices is one that will be a useful source of taxation for him. But that doesn't mean he still nonetheless sequestered the Fondo Minero, which is about 7% royalty fund that was used to help develop locally mining communities. And he essentially channeled that for other uses. And this has had a trickle-down impact where the support of local communities who depended upon those transfer of funds and are now not receiving them become, in theory, less supportive of mining. So these are some of the challenges that we have seen over the last few years studying the Mexican market on different mining clients. At this point, I'd like to turn first to Jorge, who is as well versed in this cross section of politics, security, unions, and other issues with his clients, with the mining sector, and ask Jorge, if you know, and please don't be polite if I'm wrong, or if you have a different opinion, please say it. But do you agree with the summarization I just provided? And in the outlook of the mining investment climate, particularly taking into account the midterm elections that happened this summer, what has changed, and what do you see ahead in terms of the primary risks facing miners in Mexico?
Thank you, John. No, I agree with your views on the current situation of the Mexican mining industry, and the three-folded scenario that you lay out is correct. There are three major, I would say, obstacles for the mining industry in Mexico currently. One is the government, the other one is the organized crime, and the third one is labor unions. Not to say the least regarding NGOs, because they also play a very active role and a very risky one in certain parts of the country. But first, let's speak about the government. As you pointed out, when AMLO was elected and took office, he was very reluctant to allow the mining industry to further develop. and he threatened that there would be no more mining concessions, something that he has kept that promise. But he also said that he would be reviewing around 10,000 mining concessions and threatened that those who were not current in their mining duties and obligations would be canceled. So far, that has not happened in a general fashion, but some have been canceled. Second, their organized crime is greatly causing a negative impact in many, many regions of the country, not just in the typical states controlled by the organized crime, but other states that were usually not that prone to organized crime, like in central Mexico. So that is a very, very, very important deterrent for the mining industry. And the third one, I would say it's the mining unions, which have, some of them have been in cahoots with the organized crime and also have been forcing the industry to hire the services or enter into agreements with selected companies controlled by the organized crime. So these three big areas are the most important challenges that the mining industry is facing. Along with the NGOs, which in many parts of the country do not really represent real social or environmental causes, but really form part of what we call these days extortionomics. There are NGOs who are actually disguised organized crime organizations acting in several parts of the country. And they raise social and environmental claims to basically extortion or to impede the development of projects, not just in the mining sector, but also in the energy. Some of the most important eolic wind farms and photovoltaic projects have been stopped due to the activities of these NGOs. So these are the four, I would say, pillars are becoming very, very important obstacles for the mining industry in Mexico. And as you pointed out, John, the Guardia Nacional has not been either effective or efficient in combating organized crime and supporting mining companies operating in risky areas. They have not, they have been completely, or not completely, but they have been relatively silent and inactive. They have been adopting this policy that AMLO proclaimed when he first took office, the abrazos no balazos, which means translates into English as bullets and hugs, no bullets. So the Guardia Nacional has been ineffective to that end.
Great, thank you, Jorge. Very interesting about the NGOs, you know, as a disguising themselves, in fact, being organized crime. We saw something, I've seen something similar in Peru. Fernando, you've worked for years on security issues in the mining sector. And, you know, as Jorge just sort of, I think, confirmed, and we were talking before we began today of just how splintered is the security issue in Mexico. So in what part of Mexico are you seeing mining operations threatened or even disrupted by security issues? And where in contrast to that, where do you see states where mining seems to operate without too many security issues?
Well, I would say the most dangerous states right now are Guerrero, Michoacán, and Jalisco along the Pacific coast. There are more or less the same criminal groups are present in all of that area. And then the states of Chihuahua and Durango in Northwest Mexico, which is the biggest criminal influence in the area is the Cartel de Sinaloa. Also, the Cartel de Juarez is also present in that area. And finally, the situation in the central state of Guanajuato has deteriorated in a very visible manner in the last couple of years due to a really, really big turf war between the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación and the Cartel de Santa Rosa de Lima. So basically, it's the Pacific coast, Northwest Mexico, and the very specific case of Guanajuato in central Mexico. In comparison, at this point, I would say the safest and most stable states regarding public security in Mexico in relation to mining are Querétaro and Aguascalientes.
And what makes them safer?
The public security situation and the activity of organized crime is very, very closely linked to the attitude or the profile of each state government. Unfortunately, some state governments are very, very corrupted and have dealings with organized crime, with drug cartels, while other state governments do take a pledge to combat crime in a much more visible, active manner, and take very precise steps to improve public security. It also has to do with the specific capabilities and training and equipment of each of the state police in each area. Unfortunately, some states receive very, very low funding from the federal government to improve their state police forces. And finally, it also has to do with the geography of each state. In the case, for example, of Chihuahua, Durango, and Guerrero, it's very, very rough mountain areas where most of the mining operations are located, with relative isolation conditions, and the road infrastructure is not really good. So the population centers around the mining sites are quite small, and so is the presence of the state police and the army. In contrast, for example, in the states of Querétaro and Aguascalientes, the mining operations are closer to very well-developed road networks, and there is a stronger presence of the state police. And finally, the other very visible factor that is connected to public security conditions in close to mining operations depends on whether these operations are close to drug traffic roads and undocumented migrant routes. Mexico has very strong and well-organized and well-equipped criminal organizations. Some drug cartels have a very, very impressive firepower. One can look at, for example, at the crack groups of the Cartel de Sinaloa or the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, and it actually looks like you're looking at a fully equipped military organization. It's really impressive. So they go to great lengths to keep control over certain stretches of federal and state roads in order to move their drug cargo. And they are also dedicated to the traffic of undocumented migrants on their way to the Mexico-United States border. So if a mining operation happens to be close to those routes, they have to take additional efforts to ensure their security and the stability of their operations.
Thank you very much.
Risk,
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No,
I
an
just
additional risk.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, is that sometimes, of course, these stretches of federal and state roads are the scenario of turf wars between rival drug cartels. That's it.
That's right. There is no more. If you look at the drug traffic as a supply chain, when does the product gain the most value? It's when it crosses the U.S. border. So whoever controls those corridors is likely to make the most money in the business. Going a little off cue here, Jorge, I wanted, for those who perhaps don't fully grasp the intersection of organized crime and unions Can you sort of help explain to people how they work together? I'm sure there's many different playbooks of how they work together, but how do they work together, and why is this a concern to miners?
Well, Jan, as you pointed out, before the year 2000, labor unions were completely dominated and controlled by a central union called the CTM. But then after the PRI lost the presidency of the country, many other labor unions appeared, and it has been fragmented. And the organized crime has taken this opportunity to control mining unions in several states, smaller unions, and that's how they're able to extortionate the mining companies. They have cut deals with legitimate labor unions, but they have really transformed them into parts or arms of their organized crime organization. So that's how they have been operating. And in some states, they have also been able to do so with the support of the local governments, with the local governors. That's been said.
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of a collusion between the local governments and authorities with traditional organized crime and some new labor unions who have taken this opportunity to infiltrate the mining companies and extortion them through the pressure from the unions.
So mining clients come to you, and they're dealing with these issues and maybe other issues. What are the most common legal issues that they're dealing with in Mexico? And as an add-on to that question, how on earth do you what are the legal solutions for these kind of collusive, extortionary threats?
It's really, really difficult because you may be facing challenges from NGOs, challenges arising from social licensing proceedings, challenges from local authorities that don't want to see mining activities in their municipalities or in the states, challenges from local states trying to charge mining duties and taxes that do not exist or that are trying to apply the tax laws illegally, security issues. And you approach the authorities, and as we were commenting regarding the Guardia Nacional or the Attorney General's office, they're either very ineffective or very, very, very slow in taking action against these type of situations. So basically what we have been doing with some of our clients has been to talk to the Ministry of Economy and the mining authorities to request our support at the federal and the state level, and basically asking the support from the Mining Bureau to step in and to talk to the Attorney General in different states, to talk to the environmental authorities, to talk to the municipalities, and try to lift blockades, try to send police, try to put order in those places. Because if you go to courts, proceedings are really, really, really slow. We finally got a favorable resolution for one of our clients after 7 years of litigation, and still we're experiencing a blockade that has lasted for 2 years, and the Attorney General has not been able to lift that blockade or to effectively prosecute these individuals. So it's really tough. You have to put an integral strategy in place in order to try to navigate these tough waters. I would say that a single solution or a single strategy would not work. You have to work in tandem with specialists, with government, with officers from the Ministry of Economy, with Attorney General, with many actors in the community. And something that has proven quite effective is to hire community risk consultants and to work with them and the community to try to untangle these situations and to really convey a true and objective message to the communities, in the sense that the mining companies operating in those communities don't want to steal any wealth from them, and they're procuring, the development of schools, infrastructure, hospitals, that they're abiding by the law, and that some of the challenges that those communities are facing are not really created by the mining companies, but rather by the organized crime or by the labor unions or by some folks, rather than just by the mining community, by mining companies. So that has been proven effective in dealing with these issues at a community level.
Interesting. Is there any difference in the degree of vulnerability to challenges to operations if they're owned by a foreign mining company versus a Mexican mining company in your sort of history of looking at this?
Well, sometimes Mexican mining, I would say there are, because some of the Mexican mining companies are not public companies, and therefore they're not subject to tough regulations as tough as they can be experienced in Canada or the US. So I have to say that they're able to navigate these waters with less compliance, lower level of compliance level. So they're able to, make some payments that would not be deemed legal under other legislations or regulations. They have better connections with the communities and with their leaders. And that really makes a difference if you compare that to companies with investment from Canada or the US or other jurisdictions with tougher compliance laws, and also reporting requirements like Canada that has to traceability of the payments of the assets of the extraction of the minerals. So yeah, there's the level is not completely, the ground is not completely leveled vis-a-vis with foreign companies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Fernando, back to you for a sec. You've heard all these risks, security risks, union relations, community relations, political interference. What are some of the best practices that you preach to miners to either help spot these risks or, prevent them or mitigate them?
Well, first of all, I would make an emphasis on the prevention side. I think any international mining company would be very wise to resort to very detailed field analysis of the existing conditions in the specific area where they are planning to start an operation or a project, even a prospection. Second, as Jorge just mentioned, the work of community risk consultants is very, very useful in presenting potential areas of conflict, whether it be environmental, community, or security related. Once in operation, I think one of the most important aspects is a clear standardization and identification of company vehicles, machinery, personnel, transport, and down to workers' uniforms. Very specific risk, and I have seen some really tragic incidents, is when criminal groups which conduct constant patrolling and controlling of their areas of influence mistake industrial or energy or mining workers for scouts of rival criminal groups. That is, there have been more than half a dozen incidents like that in Mexico. So it is very important that the vehicles owned by the company and the workers of the company are very well visibly uniform or labeled, as you could say, with the company logo, with the company uniform, clearly indicating that they are part of a mining operation. And of course, avoiding any colors that may be identified as military or tactical or police. Then a second very important aspect is the very, very careful vetting of any subcontracted service provider, the local companies, whether it be land clearing services, construction, waste removal, or transport, personal transport, and any other parallel service, other from the core operation of the mine, because as Jorge mentioned before, these may be closely associated or even property of the organized crime of drug cartels, because they tend to invest locally the profit from their criminal activities into construction or land clearing companies, for example. So it is very important to do a very careful, detailed vetting of the subcontracted companies. Then it is important to keep a very close communication with state and local authorities, and also always with the counseling of Mexican law firms, community relation experts, and environmental advisors, which will facilitate the communication with local authorities or state authorities, and then it will be easier to prompt these authorities to intervene or aid in case of a security crisis. And finally, in-depth research of local or regional worker unions in order to detect any potential association of those with criminal organizations, again, with the aid and counseling of local Mexican law firms.
Let me just make a comment at this point, because, you know, up until now, it sounds like Mexico is an awful place to go start a mine. And I think it's important, you know, security, when you look at all kinds of risk, security is one that hits us at an emotional and psychological level more than any other risk. And for many people, it's simply a red flag they will not entertain. But, you know, in talking to people who operate in Mexico, but also operate in other parts of Latin America, if not other parts of the world, what they tell me is, yes, security is an issue, and but it is an issue, and even, you know, the interference of unions is an issue. The extortion efforts of different groups masquerading themselves, or even not masquerading themselves. These are all issues that, again, it comes back to compliance, what Jorge was mentioning. If there is no way for your company to play the game, to make payments, then it's a red flag you can't cross. But for those who are willing who look at security issues, both in terms of the prevention that Fernando's pointed out, the added security measures that one must take when operating, and the contingency likelihood of having to make payoffs, not directly to these groups, usually through a trusted intermediary. If you look at these as a tax on the business, then it is still a business that's viable, because at the end of the day, organized crime, politicians, and unions, they don't want to shut the mine down. They want to make money out of the mine. And that's a very different risk scenario than in other parts of Latin America. Peru, Colombia come to mind, where community opposition is so strong that there is no room for negotiation. And so it's a very different approach to managing risk in Mexico that is not for the meek and is not for the unimaginative, but it is a risk that, if looked at upon as a tax on the business, is a manageable risk. And that becomes, I think, for experienced miners or for juniors who are less under the compliance spotlight, this becomes a manageable risk. Particularly if you have really good people on the ground, if you have good support from, you know, people like Fernando and Jorge and the companies that represent, it is a manageable risk. But it can cause a lot of raised eyebrows. I remember with Jorge and others at a meeting put on by Faskins in Toronto, and we talked about this. We talked about the role of organized crime and the extortions that they provide, and how sometimes you have no choice but to negotiate with them because they are the governing power in some of these isolated parts of Latin America. And of course, the lawyers in the room, the Canadian lawyers in the room, sort of stood up and said, we cannot advocate that. But that is at the end of the day what sometimes it comes down to. And I think that that's a tough pill to swallow for people. But if you're ready to do to find an elegant solution along those lines, I think it's still a viable jurisdiction. I want to pose it. First of all, I want to let Jorge comment on what I just said, and if he agrees.
Yeah, you know the name of the game, John. Maybe we could call it diversification and sophistication of organized crime, because you're very right. Why do foreign and domestic companies keep operating in Mexico? The answer is because the organized crime has become so sophisticated that they implement the extortion schemes through very elegant, sophisticated, subtle, legitimate ways, such as Fernando was putting out. They found construction companies, they found land removal companies, they found service providing companies, you name it. And those companies, they're legitimate. They are registered before all the authorities. They pay the taxes. If there is any legal due diligence on those companies, most likely you will find that they are in good standing. But who's behind those companies? Organized crime. And you're very elegantly told to hire the services from X, Y, and Z companies if you want to operate in the company. And that has been going on for many, 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 many years. I would say ever since I started my professional career, many of my clients have experienced that. If they go into a new community, they would be forced to hire the trucks from that community, employees from that community, the catering services from X leader, etc. So it has become so sophisticated that companies don't necessarily encounter compliance issues anymore.
Yeah, great point. And sometimes they're actually very good suppliers. They're just 25% more expensive than everybody else. But
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you raised the point is you can operate, you can comply with the law and still play the game, with a wink and a smile sort of thing. Here's a question a little bit out of the box, but what we're seeing, COVID and the way COVID has been fiscally managed across Latin America has caused incredible fiscal deficits, usually because lockdowns prevented governments from collecting taxes. And it has forced governments at this point to either tighten their belt or raise taxes. And of course, when you look around your economy at what parts of your economy are succeeding and what are taxable, mining stands out because it's doing extremely well right now in terms of its price levels. And we are seeing threats to raise taxes and royalties or other forms of collecting money from mining companies around the region. AMLO is actually, turns out to be very fiscally conservative, one of the most diligent about balancing budgets, et cetera. But at the same time, because of that, and because of the low cost of oil and because of the loss of taxation, has not been able to realize some of his own ambitious dreams around resurrecting Pemex and CFA and investing more in downstream industry, not to mention infrastructure and other things that he would like to build. Is there a threat, other than the Fondo Minero, is there a threat of greater taxation to Mexican mining, be it from the national or state level governors?
Well, not as far as I know, John, because that he has been very congruent with all his promises during his campaign and after he took office. He hasn't changed his mind for good or for bad. He has been completely in line with what he promised during all these years of campaigning. And therefore, experts say that he's not going to change his mind about raising taxes. And most importantly, because he knows that after the mid-elections, if he tries to raise taxes, there's a very, very big possibility that his party would lose the presidential elections taking place in 2024. So that's something that he's not going to touch ever. He's trying to have a more tough and efficient tax collection policy with the Mexican IRS. He's trying to go after tax evaders. And that is why, well, he has been going after big names, but also that's one of the reasons why he implemented the labor reform against the outsourcing companies and some companies who were issuing fake invoices to lower the tax basis upon which taxpayers were paying their taxes. So other than raising taxes, he's concentrating his efforts in being more tax efficient and more aggressive for collecting taxes. And of course, he's nowadays talking about a tax reform, but really targeting very, very small taxpayers to a more innovative tax regime, but not really changing the tax structure as it is now.
Excellent, thank you. I want to welcome our audience to type their questions into the chat mode, and we will be happy to attend them. I think we've got one coming in now from Valentina Meneses. Given Mexico's security context, any idea how much of gold mining is illegal or informal versus, formalized?
Well, to my knowledge, the biggest activity of illegal mining organizations, most of them, of course, under the wing of larger organized criminal groups, is gold, definitely. I would say gold stands for a very, very small, tiny percentage even of the illegal or irregular mining. Mostly because there are very specific regulations and compliance rules in the international market. And the market for processed gold in Mexico is not so easily accessible. So no, I would think that more than 95% of the minerals extracted by irregular groups related to criminal organizations are other minerals, not gold.
Great, thank you.
It is coal, as Fernando points out, and some years ago used to be iron ore when the prices were really, really high, and there was a lot of extraction by organized crime groups, and that's why the Mexican government implemented very tough locks in order to extract and export and trade iron ore, but not gold, really.
Okay, excellent. Now, what about social license? How does that operate in Mexico? Are there laws that require consulta previa? Is there a national social license that one must obtain? How would you define social license? Is it a series of permits? And how long does it take typically?
Well, there are some guidelines, but there are very diffuse guidelines. There has been efforts to put together a national piece of legislation, really setting forth an objective and standardized proceeding in line with international standards, but so far has not been effective. And another complexity of social licensing in Mexico is that there are several authorities that intervene in that process. And there's no a clear leader or head in those efforts. So you may have various contradicting authorities and regulations when it comes to social licensing. And it can take very, very, very long because, as I said, the guidelines are very diffuse. They're not set out in a single piece of legislation. And therefore, different authorities have different criteria when it comes to implementing social license. And of course, there's a lot of manipulation from the NGOs and local authorities and communities, and so it's a really, really complex and hard proceeding.
Okay, thank you. Fernando, I've got a question for you. Kidnapping is, Mexico has had its periods of strong, very frequent kidnapping going on. Certainly when I lived there, that was the case. But what about mining companies? Has kidnapping been used as an extortion tool against mining companies? Is there a pattern, either geographically or going after foreign mining employees versus Mexican mining employees, foreign mining companies versus Mexican mining companies? What are some of the patterns you've seen there, if at all? You're on mute, I believe, Fernando.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, now,
Okay.
yeah. Well, of course, there are recorded cases, most of them from more than 10 years ago. I can assuredly say that it's not a common occurrence, especially not of foreign expat workers or executives. The organized crime has learned that there are more stable, less risky, and more profitable ways of extorting money from mining companies and mining operations. It can occasionally happen that an armed cell of a criminal organization, let's say a drug cartel, for example, may take a group of workers, 2, 3, 5 workers, and hold them for a couple of days just as a show of force. Way of warning the mining company, we are here and you will have to play under our rules. But as kidnap for ransom goes, it's becoming more and more exceptional and rare. In the case of kidnap, I would say that prospectors and explorers are much more at risk of wandering into key operational areas of the criminal organizations than the criminal groups going after the workers for ransom purposes.
That makes a lot of sense.
Unfortunately, it's becoming less and less common.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think, these criminal organizations are incredibly rational players, and they're measuring risk and return just like any other business. And like you point out, there's a lot easier ways to extort money than kidnapping. Jorge, very interesting question here. I don't know to either of you. The Pandora Papers have revealed some unsavory things about the mining sector in Mexico. I don't know if either of you are versed on this and could comment on it.
Well, there's lots of news around the world, and especially in Mexico, about the Pandora Papers and some of the big Mexican industrial names. And one of those concerns the mining industry. But I would say, they're in the same position as any other individuals found to be involved in these Pandora Papers. And really what we have to expect is a response from the Mexican government, because as you know, those vehicles are not illegal per se, especially not in Mexico, as long as you report them and you pay your taxes and you disclose information on a timely manner to the Mexican IRS. There is no problem at all. So I would say these vehicles are very, very common, not just in Mexico, but worldwide. I would say not just in the mining sector, but in many, many industrial and commercial sectors. And what I would add is that some of these vehicles, rather than being put together for tax evasion purposes or for hiding assets, it's because they're used for trading purposes by mining companies, and are completely legitimate. They use the US dollar and other hard currencies as their trading currencies. And therefore, that's why they use these vehicles in offshore jurisdictions to facilitate trading operations, not for really carrying out tax evading activities.
Understood. Thank you. Still open to questions from the audience, but I have one. I mentioned before that in other parts of Latin America, community opposition is now the greatest single obstacle to mine project development. We haven't really discussed it in today's discussion. What is your sense? Are there cases of community opposition? Are they legitimate in the sense that the opposition it comes from a legacy of fear about the mine or a genuine fear about environmental damage or what have you? Or are they also cases that are manipulated by some of the actors we've mentioned thus far?
Well, I would say that there is definitely a political element to it, specifically in the case of the majority and ruling party in Mexico, currently Morena. Local politicians would always be more than eager to raise their hand in terms of community opposition against a mining project, especially if that will raise their visibility or make them look as social champions. And I think that can be manageable with a proper due diligence exploration.
Fair enough.
I
Jorge,
don't
any
know.
thoughts?
I'm sure Jorge has a better view on that.
In some cases, there are very legitimate concerns from the community, such as, water and pollution. So some of the mining projects really pose a big challenge to those communities in terms of environmental issues, water resources, security, but some others are just pure extortionomics, as we call them in Mexico.
Yeah.
Actually, sometimes sponsored by the local authorities.
Can you give us after the midterm elections, are there any states where there was a change in governorship that is worrisome to the mining sector?
Well, Guerrero, as Fernando pointed out, probably is the toughest state in Mexico, and the one that poses the highest level of risk for mining operations. And the new governor, who is the daughter of the individual running for that office, they say that his daughter will continue his policy and his views on the state of Guerrero, and therefore we don't expect that security will improve in Guerrero. So probably that will be the state of largest concern. And the other issue that concerns investors and the community in general is that four states along the Pacific coast were won by what is rumored to be sponsored by the organized crime. And they're important jurisdictions, mining jurisdictions, such as Sinaloa, which has a very important gold production, Guerrero for gold and silver, Jalisco, Michoacán. So I would say it's really, really concerning.
So you've just opened a really interesting point, and that is to say that organized crime, given that we've all recognized its sophistication level, has now begun to directly influence governorships in Mexico. Is that a fair assessment?
Political analysts and journalists in Mexico and internationally, before the official campaigns and during the election process, we're pointing out all these situations and these situations of great concern and rumors about certain candidates being sponsored and forced into office by organized crime.
Okay. Fernando, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I think the situation in Chiapas and Oaxaca may also change in the short, mid, or to midterm for the mining industry, in the sense that compliance demands and community conditions might change. I don't see an immediate change in terms of public security, but regarding compliance demands from the authorities and the potential risk of community conflicts may rise in Chiapas and Oaxaca on the Pacific coast due to this new political scenario with Morena being the party in power in the country.
Thanks. We got an interesting question or idea, and that is from a foreign mining company's perspective, is there an advantage to partnering, I guess, going into a sort of joint venture mode or a shared equity position in a Mexican mine with a Mexican mining company, given the differences of flexibility, operational flexibility, as well as local knowledge that Jorge, you pointed out being an advantage to Mexican mining companies? Have you seen cases like that, and does that help the Canadian or other foreign mining company?
It does help a lot because Mexican miners have a very, very long tradition of mining, and therefore some international companies venture with domestic traditional mining companies to benefit from their experience, from their connections, and sometimes from their political connections. So it they do benefit international ventures for sure. But other companies, which are larger companies, public companies, don't want to venture with local partners because of compliance issues and because they're all worrisome about their practice, whether the practices are sound or not. So they invest a lot of time and resources evaluating the market and evaluating a proper strategy to enter the Mexican market and start operating, rather than go first place and venture with a local partner.
I think you've touched on a really good point, and that is the behavior of a mining major versus a mining junior is very different.
Absolutely.
And an environment like Mexico is often a lot easier to navigate as a junior than as a major.
Yeah,
that's a really good point.
Large companies would take very, very long time to ponder the benefits of their project before entering into Mexico.
Right. Great point. Look, at this point, I'd like to just, I'd like to close out the hour. I want to thank both Jorge and Fernando for their insights today. Wonderful. Really appreciate the very frank, honest, transparent discussion that we had today. I think these kinds of discussions, in my experience, can be tough to have in live audiences in Mexico. So I think the virtual environment and the fact that we're all sort of supporters of the mining industry, I think helps us have very frank discussions. So thank you both for joining in the spirit of such a conversation. I want to remind everyone that as much as AMI enjoys putting on these coffee chats, we are a consulting firm and we're here to help support you understand risk, pre-investment or operational risks. And we work heavily with partners like Jorge and Fernando around the region and depend upon their local expertise to support our clients. So please reach out to us. For those of you who dialed in today and those of you who perhaps couldn't stay the whole time, we are recording this session and we will be sending out, we'll be posting this video as well as a summary. It takes us, by the time we edit it and get it up, it takes us about 4 working days, but you should receive a proactive email sent to anyone who registered of today's event. So thank you for those of you who provided questions, and I hope it was as enriching for everyone as it was for me. Thank you all again, and look forward to seeing you next month, Tuesday, November 2nd, at the same time for our next chat. All the best.
Thank you.